I just remembered one day, I feel like this is like one of those eureka moments where I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, wow, my kids have everything that they could possibly they have everything they could possibly need. And when I could see that not everyone lived the way we lived. Now, of course, at the age of 8, I didn't totally understand that when you are a diplomat and you have all of this, it comes with some. I would say be a disruptor, be disruptive positively.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to say what if. You've got to ask yourself what if. Isn't it that there's that beautiful quote that says, but darling, what if I fly, or what if I fall? Like, there's got to be an element of what if.
Welcome to a beginner's guide to being a grown-up. I'm Sam, and this is my passion project to interview really interesting people about their lives, and you will not be disappointed this week, I am sure. So this week I am thrilled to be interviewing Dr. Tessy Ojo CBE. So Dr. Ojo is a globally recognised leader in social justice, youth empowerment and women's leadership. She has served as the chief executive of the Diana Award, expanding its reach and impact under her leadership. She is also the founder of Tessy's Brunches, and I'm sure she's going to talk about that more, an initiative to empower women through connections and personal growth. With accolades such as the CBE and the Martin Luther King Award, she stands out as a beacon of inspiration. And I can say that because I've spent a bit of time with her and she really is very inspiring. She has other roles, extending to be a non-exec director for Comic Relief and the co-chair of the I Will Leadership Board. Her commitment to youth and social equity is evident in her media appearances and her social media presence. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Tessy to talk to us today. Tessy, welcome.
Oh my God, I don't recognize that person you were describing. Thank you so much for that beautiful description.
Well, I genuinely mean it, and I know you're going to give us a really fascinating interview today. So let me start with, tell me a little about your journey into adulthood.
It's a really great question. My journey into adulthood was quite an interesting one. I had great parents. My dad was an ambassador and my mom was a head teacher, and we lived in various countries growing up, which I think a lot of people sometimes are not comfortable with change. But I think when you've had that type of diplomatic background, change is a constant, and you just learn to. I get excited with change. Change excites me because you're thinking, what's next? Who am I meeting? What's this new place going to be like? So that was quite interesting. That was quite a huge part of my growing up. Another part, I suppose, that really shaped me growing up was I was a very curious child, and I think that came with that moving, that always wanting to understand I suppose the dynamics of life. And I remember this really well because when I was about 8, I remember really challenging my dad around sort of the affluence that was around me, knowing, and when I could see that not everyone lived the way we lived. Now, of course, at the age of 8, I didn't totally understand that when you are a diplomat and you have all of this, it comes with some. I didn't quite totally grasp that. But it was something that I quickly knew that something just wasn't right. Why did all of this happen and some people didn't have all of this? And I remember having this long, deep, meaningful conversation with my dad. And when you have a child who's always asking the why, and you think you finished the sentence, but they come up with another why. I was that child. And I remember to shut me down and to close out the conversation, my dad ended the dialogue by saying, well, life isn't always fair, and we are diplomats, and that's what it is. This is the benefits of being diplomats, that's it. And I remember thinking, well, this conversation hasn't ended because technically I am not a diplomat. I'm 8 years old. So I haven't earned the right to have all of this. And I threw that back at my dad, and he looked at me like, what is wrong with this child? But that conversation, as much as I remembered some bits of it, my parents actually held on to that conversation a lot, because that conversation, they then threw it back at me and said, so what are you going to do about it?
Wow.
And that, what you're going to do about it, kind of became kind of my mission statement. At that, as young as it was, I always looked out for, okay, I'm going to do something about it. So whenever I saw any, whenever I had an opportunity to notice any imbalance in life, whatever, maybe someone had two drinks and someone didn't have one, I offered one. It was that, what you're going to do about it became kind of the ethos of my life growing up.
Wow, that's amazing. So you lived in places all over the world. What are some of the places that you lived? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I was born and bred. I was born in London and stayed in London till I was about 10, 11, and then we moved to the Netherlands. But when we moved to the Netherlands, I my dad was an ambassador over the Benelux, and at the time it was called Benelux, which is Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. So whilst we were based in the Netherlands, we mostly we kind of went around, especially at the weekends. And then at the age of just coming up to about 13, 14, I moved to Lagos, to Nigeria. So those are kind of my three formative. I would say the two biggest places that had a massive influence in my life was London and Nigeria.
And I guess quite a different way of living between those two places as well. A quite different lived experience, even as
Very,
a
very, very different. Very, very different. And it came with, it came, but I think it was all different. But I think I was always, I was never scared of change. I was kind of always looking forward to the next thing. The change that happened when we moved to Nigeria was quite different because I'm the third of seven children. But when we moved to Lagos, my two oldest didn't come along because we're coming up to their GCSE year, and so they were sent back to London to boarding school, and so this was the biggest change that I was most uncomfortable with because to a large extent I had kind of lost the two, kind of my protectors, the people who kind of looked out for me the most in terms of my two older brothers. So I think that was my most uncomfortable move, my most uncomfortable change, and also to a large extent, a change that also kind of defined me a lot because when we um, when we moved, I remember now trying to make friends. I never struggled with making friends, particularly because I had maybe older brothers, and so they kind of had older people that came around, and I was friends with their friends' siblings, and that's how the friendship started. But then, as the oldest sibling, at that point, I had to now make my own friends. Um, and I eventually had a friend who I absolutely dearly loved, and I went to visit her one day, and I realized, this is a very long story, but I'm going to try and cut it short. I realized that I saw her brother, and her brother was quite poorly, had no idea what was wrong with him. Eventually, through conversation, I learned that he had sickle cell anemia, and this was my very first time of ever coming across sickle cell anemia. I was about 14, and I began to kind of read about it. I very quickly, I didn't have this vocab at the time, but I very quickly learned it was actually a health inequality because this was a life limiting um, condition that actually no one spoke about, affected only a certain demography, like you had to be black or mixed, black or brown, to that were predominantly affected by this. Yet there was no research going into it, very little treatment. At this point, I was also trying to choose my GCSE subjects. I literally decided this was going to be my life's cause. I was going to be the person who, if no one was going to fix this, and I had to fix it. I remember deciding I was going to study biochemistry for my degree, really focused on my my biology, chemistry, my sciences, because I thought this is what I'm going to do. If nobody else was cared about this, I wanted to care about it and I wanted to fix it. And so that really shaped my life in the sense that I did go to university, I did study biochemistry, with the absolute determination to be that first person to cure sickle cell or to find a cure for sickle cell anemia. I did graduate, I did get a first job, but I also realized that I absolutely didn't like being a scientist, sadly. I know. I know.
That curiosity and determination to help and make a difference is very clear from that 8-year-old through to that teenager through to university. So,
Yeah.
so what happened then? So you got into a lab and you're like, maybe not for me.
So I love the academic rigor. I realize I do love the academic rigor. I do love to. I think when you're curious, you want to learn things. So I love the academic rigor, but I also loved people. I realized that I needed to be with people. And I realized being a scientist, my first job as a scientist, working in a lab, was didn't really interact with people, and that was the bit I hated. I didn't hate anything else. I just hated the fact that I felt cut away from people. And I often say now that people give me life. Like being amongst people and interacting with people is a huge part of who I am. And just that change, meeting new people, all of that is it's very important to me. So I remember then, after graduating and saying to my immediate older brother, like, what do I do? Like, I feel like I have spent from age 14 to almost age 21 being 100% absolutely clear and focused on what I want to do. And then having this job at 21 and realizing that I just don't I couldn't see a future where I spend my time in the lab. I just didn't see it. And my brother had just completed an MBA at the time. He worked in the tech industry or in some industry. I can't remember what industry he worked in. He just said, "Look, why don't you just do an MBA? That would just open doors for you." And I did. I did an MBA, and actually, when I finished my MBA, I got a job in tech. And this is it. So in my head, I thought, okay, this is cool because tech was very new. This was about 1996, 95, 6. And I thought this is quite cool because it was about 95, 94, 95. I thought if I started this job in tech was so new that actually using tech to cure something was not out of the wasn't was it made sense. I could see the alignment in still pursuing my purpose, but this time, rather than doing it through rather than doing it through the lab, I would bring my science background plus tech, and that could be that's innovation. So I thought that's cool. I'm going to get into the tech industry, and I'm still going to be very, very much aligned to my purpose. So that was kind of how my career went on until I realized I was quite far. I loved tech, loved everything that tech brought, but I think there was no tech wasn't at the time interested, and I say this very loosely, interested in social good. Tech at that time was very focused on other stuff like what tech does the best, what tech does, and not no one was. There wasn't an interest in social good, and I use the word social good now because we have the vocabulary to articulate what I wanted then, which makes absolute sense now, but no one thought about those aspects at the time.
No, I think the kind of meditech and social tech and that social purpose probably wasn't in the vocabulary in a way it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you you moved away from the labs, went into tech to continue to try and change the world. There's a definite theme here. And so tell me how you ended up at the Diana Award.
Okay, so that's another really long story, but I'm going to try my best to shorten it. So,
It doesn't matter how long the episode is, Tessa. You take as long as you like. I want to hear the story.
I stayed in tech. I got married, and it was tech. Well, tech was great. I actually enjoyed tech. I think the geek in me found tech really enjoyable because tech had, you just learned new stuff. And I also part of my role was also teaching, learning and development, teaching, bringing this technology to companies, and so that being with people, teaching people this, was just something I absolutely loved it. I absolutely enjoyed it, and I had my first child. I took some time out in 1998. I didn't take a lot of time. Just about at that time, you only had 12 weeks maternity. Shock, horror. So I had my baby and went straight back to work. And then in 2000, I thought, oh, do you know what? I'd been here for a while. I needed to kind of really take a moment. I think increasing over that time, I got increasingly, when you love what you're doing, you have it's a great, it had great wage from it, great pay, great everything, but I felt restless inside of me. I knew deep inside of me that the 8-year-old Tessie was probably looking at me and shaking her head, was really disappointed that what's happened to this 28-year-old Tessie, or coming up to her 28-year-old Tessie, what's happened to her? She's kind of lost her way a little bit. And I remember thinking, do you know what? I would really love to take some time to just reflect. And as we had a child who was just coming up to, I think she was just gone past one, I thought this is a good time to just plan for a second child and just take a moment, take a break. And so I did. And in 2000, I had my son. And I just thought, you know what? I'm going to take a year out. I'm just going to really think about what I really, really want. The thing that struck me, one of the things I did, if I'm going to rewind a little bit, one of the things I did when we first moved back to Nigeria was, my mom was a head teacher, and my mom used to say to me, oh, well, you talk a lot about doing stuff. What would you like to do with my school? She had a school, and I said to her, look, I would love to run after school clubs for kids who didn't have access to after school clubs, because I had a lot of access to stuff like that. And so I began to run after school clubs in my mom's school. And I remember 13-year-old Tessy doing a poster. My first poster advertising this was, it said something like, if you are poor and your parents have no money to afford for you to go to after school clubs, then this is a club for you. And that was pretty much the ethos. I wanted to look out for those who didn't have, those who were being left behind. Anyway, so flip back to the year 2000. I had my son. I genuinely felt incredibly blessed. I was coming up to, I think I was 29. I thought, like, where has all of this? I was, had a great, just everything was perfect. Life was perfect. Life was incredibly perfect. And I just remembered one day, I feel like this is like one of those eureka moments where I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, wow, my kids have everything that they could possibly, they have everything they could possibly need. Not necessarily physically having it, but they had me. And I knew that I would be their champion. I knew that I would be that type of mother that would break down walls and light up shadows and whatever. I would be your biggest nightmare if you were my child's teacher, because I would turn up at every meeting when you're hoping no parent turns up. But I had one of that moment when I thought, what about the others? What about those who didn't have a champion? And I almost began to hear that 8-year-old Tessie saying, what are you going to do about it? Good for you that your kids have you. What about others? And I thought, oh my goodness, okay, I have time. I'm going to think about anyway. So I'm in this moment of, I had decided I'm going to, in my maternity leave, I'm going to give back. I'm going to find a charity. I'm going to support loads of things. I wrote to the Department for Education. Had said, no, this is my CV. I really want to help. I knew that the biggest part of my life wanted to create change. It was pretty much, when I think about the sickle cell anemia, it was always about that child who was being left behind, the people who no one cared about to a large extent, the forgotten, the ignored, that side of, So I said, look, I wanted to help, and I was directed to be on different trustee boards of charities, blah blah. And I just somewhere inside of me just didn't feel that was that was the thing. And I remember one evening I sat down in the evening, I was reading through the newspaper, flipping through the newspaper, and I saw an advert. And this advert had said a new youth charity had just been set up and they needed someone to help build the systems. Now, my job title in my job was a systems analyst, which meant I helped companies build their entire system once they told me what they wanted. I built the system and I created a manual and all of that sort of stuff. And I thought, I'm going to write to this charity and say to them, I want to help you build your systems. Cut the long story short, this charity wrote back and said, sorry, we don't. We need someone who will do the job. We don't need your volunteering because you volunteering for 3 or 4. At this point, I only had about 3 or 4 months left for my maternity leave. But they said to me, "Oh, would you come and have the interview?" And I thought, "Oh, I'm gonna go for the interview not because I want this job, but because I wanted to get in front of the right people." And I went for the interview and I reiterated and I said, "Look, I don't want this job, but what you will be crazy to deny my offer, to refuse my offer. Do you know how much companies pay my job for me to spend a week, a month with them? I have 3 months I'm giving to you. I don't want anything from you. I just want to help." And it's a really, really long story of how charity funding happens because they then made me realize that if they took my 3 months of my time free, then they would have to return the unspent money that year, which will make it really difficult to get the money the following year when I had gone.
Yeah.
And they really wanted it, and they offered me the job, which I turned down. But again, like I said, it's a really super long story. But a few days later, I felt that. I feel a few days later, 8-year-old Tessy crept back to my heart and said, "What? Why on earth did you turn that down? And it felt to me. This is the moment when it felt to me that you have always, always wanted to do something meaningful. You have always, always wanted to shift the dial for children and young people, and now you find an opportunity and you say no. Shame on you." This is how 8 years old Tessie speaks to me. And I thought, okay, cool. So I rang them back and I said, "If you would have me, I would do." Now, taking this job was the worst. At that point, financially, was the worst decision of my life because it came with literally about £30,000 pay cut. This is in 2000. I said to my new employer at this time, I said to them, "You don't need to give me the salary, just pay to the nursery. That's how much." It literally covered my nursery fees for my kids. I had to say to my husband, you will have to give me my travel card money to go to work. I didn't even have that. But it was the best decision of my life. It was the worst financial decision, but the best decision when you think about a purpose-led life and a purpose-driven life. And I literally, if I was to answer what was the best decision, what advice would I give anyone? I would say just listen to that voice and pursue that dream, pursue that purpose. And it might not look pretty at the start, but it will come through. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So going back to your 18-year-old self, what would maybe I should ask your 8-year-old self, but we're going to stick with 18 for now. I feel your 8-year-old self would have been quite judgmental of you. But your 18-year-old self, what would she recognise about you now, and what would she be really surprised by?
Oh gosh, she would recognize. I think she would. I think she would recognize the purpose. She would recognize. She would almost say, "I knew it. I knew this is what you were around." Can I tell you one story? I'll tell you a story. So I told her I studied biochemistry, and my biochemistry lecturer my lecturers were great. I loved them. Anyway, a few years ago, no, maybe 10 years ago, I connected with one of my lecturers on Facebook. And when he looked at what I was doing, he saw everything about me on Facebook, and he said, "Oh, Tessy Ojo, I'm so glad you found your calling. You were you were a different type of biochemistry student." He said, "I'd never seen." He said the way he said, "I'd never seen a scientist who tells the story of enzymes like the enzymes are their best friends."
You are a natural storyteller. I think that's definitely fair.
He said, I said to him, "Was that a compliment?" He goes, he said, they all sat down and they read the story and they kept saying, I got all of the words right, but if the way I talk about the enzymes, I talk about them like they're real life people. I tell the story of them, and suddenly they're like, you can't quite feel her for what she's done, but it's just not scientific. It's a storyteller who's trying to be a scientist. So I think that my 18-year-old self go, finally you found your calling. That's who you are. You are a change maker. You see things as, to me, things are people. People, I see people in stuff, and I want to, I want people to thrive. I want people to survive, and injustice is something that really I don't know, hurts my soul. And so when I see that, I want to tell, I want to see it, and I want to platform it. I want to tell the story of it so that change happens.
Amazing. So, what would she be surprised by?
What would she be surprised by? Oh, I know what she'll be surprised by. So this is what she'll be surprised by. So I'm 6'1", I'm quite a tall girl, and I really struggled with being tall because I've been this high since I was 13. Interestingly, true life story, at one point, I think I was about 14, I actually asked my parents to have my legs amputated because I hated being tall. I was bullied for being tall. I was called all sorts of names, and I absolutely hated it. I was so uncomfortable as a tall girl. I think my 18-year-old self, I think it was, to be fair, I think it was just about that age I began to finally embrace my height and see tall as beautiful. I think my 18-year-old self, looking at me now, that I do a bit of fashion modeling, I do tall modeling, I do it all for social good. I talk about inclusivity, being inclusive, and tall brands, and wearing your height and standing tall. I think my 18-year-old self will go, who is she? Who's this person? Who's this person who's wearing 4 inches high heels? Because I never wore heels when I was uncomfortable with my height. I think my will be pleasantly surprised, but almost to a double take about who is she? Who is this person who's got heels on? So that would be a huge surprise to my 18-year-old self.
I think that's so powerful, isn't it? 'Cause when we're younger, we care so much about what other people think
Yeah, for
and not
sure.
fitting in. And I think as we get older, we definitely come into our power.
100%. 100, and it's like I could never, I think I was, yeah, as a teen, I could never wear heels ever. If you bought me heels, I actually found a way I took them to get the heels cut down. Um, but I could never dress up now without wearing heels. I could never do it. I could never. Like when out and about, yeah, I'll stay in flats. But to me, like I want to show up in my 4 inches heels. If I could wear five, if I found I will wear heels. I want you to notice me like I'm 6'1", but if I can add more, like, look, this is me. I'm here. I'm all of me. I'm ready. Look at me. Like, please look more. That's almost, and it's just so funny thinking about my younger days. Yeah, so it's that. I think that would be a huge shock to my 18-year-old self for sure.
I think that's so powerful. As if you've got older, just that you just get more confident, don't you, as you
Yeah.
age? And I think part of that is you go through those times of finding it really hard and feeling out of place, and then you realise that you can survive that. And that brings us to the next question, which is around kind of experiences of kind of failure or rejection. So, have you got any examples where, like, times in your life where you've just not managed to achieve the thing you wanted to do, and how you cope with it?
Do you know what? Being a charity chief exec is full of it. I was chatting to a charity chief exec just this week, and she said to me that she she said, I've realized that actually if you wanted to rewrite my job title, you should just call me professional beggar, because I spend 80% of my time asking people for money. So professionally, that's what I do. And I said to her, so how does that make you feel? She goes, I don't know. And I said, girl, get comfortable with that. I love it. I love I love it. I said, well, the thing I've come to terms with is firstly, I'm never asking for myself. I'm not asking you to feed me. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm actually helping you. I'm helping you redirect your funds. I want you to be a better person. So actually I'm doing you good in that sense. So I have to you have to set your brain, your mindset to that to say, look, it's not about me. If I can some people have a lot and some people don't. And it's my mission in life to balance it out. And that's what I do. Having said that, when you come into those spaces really really so passionate and you know you can see the needs and when you get those rejections because ultimately there's so many things that calls for money, right? We all have multiple needs, and when you have those no's, they're so they're quite demoralizing because you almost want to say, do you not see this need? Do you not understand? Can you not see it? And whilst they might see it, and that might just not be their priority. And so every now and again, it's quite, sometimes it's heavy, it's a lot, especially when you get a lot of no's. And sometimes I love when I can speak to people, it's when you write, you do proposals and you do stuff like that. And I suppose maybe it doesn't come through and someone, you get those letters of no, especially when you get feedback and you know that they haven't actually read it properly because they've said something like we only fund charities with income of over 1 million, and you know that we're also why funding me because I'm an income of over 1 million. We just know that they haven't read it properly, and
Yeah.
that's quite frustrating because you put a lot into stuff like that. So, but at times you have to remind you always have to remind yourself that there are people out there. You just need to be connected to the right. You just need to meet the right people in the right place, and your mind. I always feel like what's mine would never depart from me. Or sometimes I say to my daughter, I might have lost this battle, but I'll never lose the war. So
Hmm.
it's okay.
Yeah, I love that framing of that rejection is actually they might just want to be spending the money somewhere else.
Yeah,
And actually that's okay because I'll go and find someone else who wants
yeah,
to work with us as a charity and what I do is interesting to them. I think that's a really lovely way of framing the rejection. That and I love the fact that you're like, they clearly didn't read this.
and every now
I'm
and
sure
again I
that
take.
happens.
But to be, I got actually. Do you know what? I got one of those this week, and the reason they gave was so not it. So I went back and I said, "Are you sure this email was for us? Because the two reasons you gave was it's not us." And I attached again an annual report that demonstrated that the two reasons they had
Mm.
given, and so I'm waiting for their response. But I know this happens. Like sometimes it's not read, and I think that at moments like that you feel, it's. Do you know what? It's what we're here for. I'm signed up today, so I'm here for the long haul.
And it's that tenaciousness, isn't it? When if you are, as you said, a professional beggar, you have to be tenacious, don't you, to get anything done?
Yeah.
And I have a feeling your younger self would have recognised that because I think from the age of 8, you have clearly illustrated a tenaciousness and a curiosity of
Yes.
people and getting stuff done and learning stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
So that brings me to
Absolutely.
my next question: what is the best decision you've ever made?
I want to say moving to the charity sector. Um, but I will also say that look, as a person, I feel incredibly blessed. I have a wonderful husband. I have two beautiful children. Um, I feel that the best decision I made was saying yes to my husband, which sounds very very cheesy,
No, not
genuinely
at all.
cheesy. However, I think that if you aren't in the like it takes a lot. When I made the decision to say yes to the charity sector, we made that decision together, knowing fully well that I was taking a £30,000 pay cut. I had just had the second child. Both my kids were going to go to nursery, and literally my pay would only pay the nursery fees.
Hmm.
So that was me saying yes to the charity sector. Was my husband saying yes to footing my bills for a while, and it takes that takes a lot of commitment. That takes a lot of commitment to say, okay, I'm okay with you pursuing your dreams until such a time as you can earn enough to pay your own way. So I would probably say that was my best. That's one of my best decisions.
I love that. It's that partnership, isn't it? If you're
Yeah.
doing it together
Yes.
to get both of you where you want to be.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I always like to ask people is about advice. So, we all get lots of advice, we give a lot of advice. And I'm really interested in when someone's got a piece of advice and they haven't taken it. So, what's the best piece of advice you've been given that you completely ignored?
Oh my God, this has to be from my dad. So,
And it's
when
not, don't say, ask any more questions. Why? It's not that, is it?
so this was many many years. So my father is one of my father absolutely loves education, believes in education, and he often said, if you haven't done a masters, you're not educated enough. You have to like have your masters to feel that. And I remember he loved that I did an MBA and loved that I was doing well in tech. And I remember when I rang my parents to say that I was moving to the charity sector. And at the time, obviously, my father thought I meant that I was going to work for a charity shop. And the thing he said to me, I don't know why I'm whispering like he's going to hear me, but, but he said to me, how can, with all of the education that we've invested in you, you're ending up in a charity shop? I forbid you doing that. So I was like, Dad, I'm not working for a charity shop. I'm just working for a charity in the charity sector. But I think he was like, but charity is what, no, people don't do that as a job. Charity is something my dad was a Rotarian, so he doing charity work or doing voluntary work was not something you got paid for. It was just something you did alongside
Yes.
your day job. And he couldn't quite comprehend that actually you are moving. So I think that was the best advice I didn't take by not listening to that voice. And many years later, a few years down the line, he always said, this was your best form of disobedience, because you were always very disobedient, you were always very stubborn, but this was your best form of rebellion. And I was incredibly proud that I said no to him.
I love that. I love that. I love a bit of disobedience.
You
Don't
have
get
to
anywhere in
put
life
it
with
in
about
you.
tenacity and
No,
disobedience, do you?
no, absolutely. You've got to be a slight. I always talk about what's that? A positive disruptor. You've got to
Yeah.
positively disrupt a little bit.
I like that. Yeah. I think we should all have a little bit of rebel in us.
100%.
It's how stuff gets done, I feel.
100%. 100%. I couldn't agree more.
So during your life, you've obviously kind of had lots of different experiences from, that completely different world of being in a very kind of technical science based education to realizing quite quickly that wasn't for you, through to the tech world, through to the charity world. And obviously there's a theme through that for you of that social change and wanting to fix inequity and around the world. Um, so in when we do this podcast, I ask the same everybody the same question, which is, if you could put something into the beginner's guide to being grown up with the experience that you've had in all those different areas and your individual journey, what is the one thing, what's the one piece of advice you would put into the beginner's guide?
It's so hard. I don't know. That is such a tough question. What is the one thing? I would say be a disruptor, be disruptive positively. You have to, I think we've been talking about, you have to have you have to have a focus that's a little bit disruptive. You almost have to, but it comes with being curious enough as well. So there's a bit of positive disrupting that's underpinned by curiosity. Because
Love that.
there's got to be a bit of you that says, what if?
Yeah.
You've got to be able to say, what if? What if we did this the other way around? What if we did this a different way? What if? You've got to ask yourself, what if? Isn't it that there's that beautiful quote that says, but darling, what if I fly? Or what if I fall? Like, there's got to be an element of what if. And I think if you keep that, so it's got to be that positive disruptiveness, but underpinned by being curious enough and that what if. I don't know if that forms an advice, but it's
I,
a
I think
combo of
that's
three.
I think that's fantastic advice, which is be constantly curious
Yeah.
and kind of challenge the way things are done. Kind of what if we did it differently? What if we succeeded? What difference would we make? I love that. I think that's a fantastic piece of advice. And I think lots of people will love that as a piece of advice. So, Tessy, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I've loved learning about your journey. I'm still can't get over your 8-year-old self with the whys. I think anybody who's got children will recognise that why child.
Oh, honestly, I had one of them and I was like, please don't, please, this is Nemesis. Please leave me alone, please.
It's payback. Your dad would call that payback, I feel.
100% payback. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. It's been a really interesting chat, and I know everybody who listens will find it really interesting as well. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved it as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up. If you enjoyed it, please like, follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If there's someone who inspires you that you'd like me to interview, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram and TikTok. In the meantime, enjoy being a grown-up.